the president, who's going to Morrisville, North Carolina, and going to talk about the fight against COVID-19. And when we come back, we're also going to talk about some of the fights, the literal fights that are going on in places like Seattle, Portland, Chicago. That's when we come back with more of American Agenda. Briefing at the Bioprocess Innovation Center. Again, this in North Carolina, so we'll be on top of that in the next hour. I wanted to leave you with this, though. Take a look at this. This is up in a national park in Alaska. This is a live streaming right now. And you can see a bear a little in the distance, and they take this live. You'll see bears come and go. There's one on the upper left. They come down and eat the salmon. Believe it or not, they had to close part of the park because they've had some rangers up there positive for COVID-19. Strange virus that it is. We'll be back with more of American Agenda after this. And welcome to the second hour of American Agenda. I'm Bob Sellers. We are joined by our family of co-hosts right now. Policy Director at America First and former Senior Advisor to President Trump, Curtis Ellis, is going to be with us momentarily. Lawyer and GOP strategist Ford O'Connell, and Republican strategist and President of Marathon Public Affairs, Jeanette Hoffman. We know that the president is behind Jeanette in the polls. We also know that coronavirus has something to do with that, and so does the economy, because the irony is people rate him higher on the economy than Joe Biden, yet the economy is struggling. So it seems like then the challenge is dealing with COVID because that's affecting the economy.
Right. Yeah. I mean, well, I think people trust President Trump to handle the economy better than they would Joe Biden. And so I think President Trump, what he's doing today in North Carolina is very important. Getting our country back to normal doesn't happen until we have a vaccine, Bob. And now you're hearing Operation Warp Speed is making great progress. Companies like Moderna, they're moving very fast in clinical trials and human trials, getting very close to getting a vaccine. That's what the president is going to talk about today. And look, you know, polls at this state in the race, I find them very meaningless because President Trump is basically campaigning against himself. We haven't heard anything from Joe Biden.
That's true.
He's still in the basement, right? Until there's actual debates, until you can actually compare and contrast the two candidates, the polls right now don't mean anything.
Well, the good and bad of that is a lot of times re-elections are a referendum on the president. And this COVID situation certainly came out of nowhere. We came out of China, but it came out of nowhere as far as being on our calendar of events for 2020. And so let me go to you, Ford. I believe you're in Florida. You usually are, so I don't know if that. So how are things there? How are people reacting? Because if you're outside and you look at the headlines, oh my goodness, things are just going to you-know-where.
Well, I think the national media has really gaslighted the people about Florida. Look, a lot of people know of Florida, but they don't know about Florida. And frankly, things on the ground are a lot better here than the national media says. And a lot of that is due to President Trump and Governor DeSantis' great leadership. Obviously, you know, we have an outsized portion of elderly folks, those over age 65, and Governor DeSantis and President Trump have made sure we've taken care of the most vulnerable. I think the rest of it, in a lot of ways, in terms of the headlines about the number of cases, is really misleading. Frankly, our hospitalizations are down, and we're really getting business done, and we have 1/8 of the mortality rate of New York. So I think we're in good shape. Everyone would like to be better, but it's a lot better in Florida than the president and the governor get credit for.
Yeah, to me, Curtis, it seems like it's all about hospitalizations, because I don't care how many cases we get, if there's a strong survival chance and we have treatments for it, and the mortality rate has been going down. It's almost like the more positive cases you have, the more you realize that the mortality rate is pretty small. But there still is the issue of hospitalizations, right?
Well, that's exactly right. And if you look at the numbers, the hospitalization utilization rate in Florida has been flat throughout this entire crisis over surging and spiking and, you know, ground swelling and whatever other adjective they use. We see that the death rate, the mortality rate is flat. The deaths are flat, and the utilization. None of the hospitals are being overwhelmed, which was always the precondition, the premise for shutting down the whole world and hiding in our house. We didn't want to overwhelm the hospitals. Yeah. Well, here, the hospitals aren't being overwhelmed in Florida. I'm in Florida, too. People are going on about their business. The other thing that I find very amusing about this whole thing is people keep screaming, Governor DeSantis should issue a mask order, Governor Cuomo, who they praise as being this all-knowing great manager, he has not issued a mandatory mask order either. And so, things are, you're exactly right.
Go ahead, Ford.
Bob, you raise a greater point here, and that is that the battle against COVID-19 has become political. The Democrats don't want you to know that President Trump is leading the charge, from whether it's fast-tracking a vaccine, making sure the governors have the needed resources, or rejiggering the distribution system when hotspots arise. They think that this is their way to win the presidency. It's extremely dirty. It's absolutely wrong. They gaslighted people into thinking the bubonic plague's outside their front door when the reality is very different. If President Trump is out there front and center, like today in North Carolina, in Research Triangle Park, showing that he's on the front lines of this, trust me, the very voters that he's missing in those polls right now, seniors, suburbanites, independents, they will come home to him because they agree with him on every other issue. They just want to see him be front and center, and that's why we've seen the turn in the White House press briefings and why he's smart to make sure that everywhere he goes, it's always about battling coronavirus and saving American lives.
Well, it seems like that has to be important now. And I think it's kind of ironic here, Jeanette. I was looking at something. Over the weekend, there were 105 New York restaurants and bars that have been cited for distancing violations. Let me tell you why that bothers me. When they contact trace in New York, they've been told not to ask if people participated in protests. And another thing that is a pet peeve, I've done a good bit of traveling just because I live out of town and I am considered essential. I know I'm not essential, but people think the job is. So
you are essential, Bob.
Well, to some people in my life, I am. So there are planes that are full of people, and I mean packed full of people.
Yes.
Yet nobody gets a citation for that. And I don't wish any trouble on the airlines. I know they're in a tough position. But why is it that these restaurants and bars that are just trying to make a living get cited, yet planes don't get cited? Protesters can go on about, their merry way, if you will.
Right, because some constitutional rights are important and some are not. And that's what, this whole thing is all about, right? I mean, you see governors in Democratic states out there locking arms with protesters, but yet saying some small businesses can't open. And I'm talking about my own home state of New Jersey, where Governor Murphy locked arms with protesters, but yet said some gyms still are not allowed to open. It's absolutely ridiculous. And they're giving fines out for people who aren't social distancing, but you can't say anything about the protesters because apparently coronavirus is smart and they don't go, it doesn't travel to protesters. It's all really ridiculous. I'm glad to see people are wearing masks. I'm glad to see the president is embracing mask wearing. I think, this all comes down to common sense. I agree with Ford in saying that the Democrats are trying to politicize this. I don't know how Governor Cuomo is suddenly the angel of COVID-19 when he's actually responsible for a lot of nursing home deaths. I have not seen the media calling Governor Cuomo and a lot of these other Democratic governors out for what they've done in nursing homes. And it really is, a tragedy. There have been a lot of preventable deaths in nursing homes. I don't see that happening in Florida, actually. I think, if you look at what's going on in Florida, I think they're actually doing a pretty good job of keeping the most vulnerable protected here.
I'm guessing, Ford,
unfortunately.
They've learned that lesson. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt, Jeanette.
No, that's okay.
Ford, I assume they've learned that lesson from New York? Because Cuomo became kind of, you were saying, the angel of death in some of these senior homes.
Well, absolutely. What Florida learned right away is that we have to protect those that are most vulnerable, those particularly in the elderly communities and the nursing homes, as well as those with pre-existing conditions. And Governor DeSantis saw that right out of the box, and that's what's so great. I think to your point, though, Bob, I think what has a lot of people frustrated around the country, because we know the virus doesn't know the difference between a red and blue state, is how arbitrary the rules become. There's no rhyme or reason in what we should do, and I think that that's frustrated a lot of conservatives, and we saw that over the mask debate as well. And then now you have President Trump out there recommending a mask, and somehow the media is still taking a 2x4 to him, and yet he's doing the right thing and leading the right way. It really comes down to the media's perception of how President Trump is handling this and how it's being driven down to people. And if President Trump overcomes that, they are going to listen to him, particularly about Biden being a figurehead for the far left.
All right, we're going to take a break here. We're keeping
Law and Order campaign as he faces an uphill re-election battle.
Let's bring back our family of co-hosts. What can be done to quell this unrest? Curtis, what's the best thing to do?
The best thing to do is enforce the law. I'd like to just point out...
Why do you think, Curtis, I couldn't agree more. Why do you think the law is not being enforced?
Well, you see, there's two things going on in Portland, and which we have to be very clear. There are large peaceful demonstrations on one side of town, and then a few blocks away, you have determined, hardcore anarchists attacking federal property. You saw, if you look at that report that you just saw, you see some people, you see large crowds doing one thing, but then you see a bunch of people shooting off fireworks, trying to pull down a fence, dressed in helmets. You don't wear a helmet for a peaceful protest. Sorry, gang, it doesn't work that way. And with their leaf blowers to blow away tear gas. Why would you bring a leaf blower to a peaceful protest? Nobody is tear gassing those large demonstrations. They're trying to tell us that there is no such thing as those riots. It's all large peaceful protests. That is not the case. That is not the case.
Yeah.
You can enforce the law against people doing damage to federal property and let the people peacefully protest, which is pretty much what's going on now, but it's being mischaracterized, and they're conflating these two different, very distinct events going on.
Yeah. I just wanted to give our other guests a chance to weigh in. Ford, a graduate of University of Virginia Law School, so he must be smart. My alma mater is Virginia. Not the law school, though. I didn't get there, so he's way smarter than I am. And tell me about the dynamics at work when the federal government sends in agents to try to establish some sort of control. I am sure that frustrates the local police department.
Frustrate the local police department, but usually the local police department tries to work with you. And we've had a long history in the modern era of using federal forces to actually uphold the laws of the Constitution from John Kennedy on down. The problem here is that in Portland and in Seattle and Chicago, they don't want help because it's Donald Trump. And if you ask the police, particularly in Portland and Seattle, they welcome this help. The problem is the city councils decided that this is all about politics and upholding the law is not good. So therefore, they're going to handcuff the police. And we're really sort of in a constitutional stalemate. But Donald Trump is right about what it is we should be doing. And obviously in Portland, after 57 days of a riot, what has been going on in Portland is not working and needs to be rectified.
Yeah. Jeanette, what is this about?
This is about politics, plain and simple, Bob. I agree with Ford. I watched your interview with Sheriff Clark just a little while ago. These mayors, these council members, they don't want to shut this down. They could shut this down if they wanted to. They don't want to. They want to say this is all protest. The liberal media wants to call it protest. But I agree with Ford and with Curtis. When you're burning cities down, that's not a protest. That's anarchy. And that's what's going on here. Look, government has a responsibility to keep people safe. There's a lot of violence going on. There's Molotov cocktails being thrown. Police officers are being injured. If the local government can't keep people safe, federal government has to come in, has to take control, and they have to keep people safe.
Curtis, it also...
Bob, here's one thing I want to throw in. Let me throw in one thing, and that is we are not seeing this in any Republican-controlled major city. Now, think about that.
And why do you think that is? Why?
Because they're not playing politics. They decided not to handcuff the police, but to let them do their job.
Yeah. Go ahead, Curtis.
Yeah, as I was saying, and as Ford said, let the police do their job. The police have been told to stand down and in Seattle, and that's the problem. Look, I remember Elliot Ness and the Untouchables. You send the feds in to do the job when the local police are too corrupt or incapable of doing the job. And that's what's happened. That's what we're seeing in Portland. The police are being told to stand down. when you've got these rioters, basically, is what they are.
And I think, Jeanette, that most people would support police going out and doing their jobs. I think this is
absolutely.
And I also get the feeling here that Black Lives Matter, they get away with being, I mean, so liberal, so left of center that some would say Marxist. They get away with that because if you criticize them, that must mean you're a racist. When in fact, they have expanded way beyond what happened with George Floyd, which all of us would agree should never happen.
Yeah, and that came from a place where we could have all agreed on we could have found common ground around George Floyd. But this has gotten so out of control, Bob. You know, the left has gone so far with this defund the police movement. And I think the majority of Americans want to defend the police because what is happening right now, our police officers are under attack in our nation from the far left. And it's horrifying. And you see the violence in our cities, in Chicago, in Kansas City. In Kansas City, a 4-year-old was shot and murdered while they were sleeping. And that's what Operation Legend comes from. Legend was a child who was shot. President Trump named this Operation Legend, sending federal forces into our cities to stop this violence. It's really insane. And I think the vast majority of Americans know that. It's just this far left movement that has just really gone crazy right now.
Yeah, and Curtis, I get the feeling that some of these politicians are purposely holding back the police, not letting them do their jobs. And I'm wondering if that comes back and bites them. If they somehow help get Biden elected and then they want the police to do their jobs, it's like, well, wait a minute, this is out of control now.
It is out of control in the sense that if Biden were to be elected, he would cave to the far left demands to defund police, replace police with these professional social workers or whatever they imagine. And the police are not going to be happy about this. We're already seeing the police not really responding to calls, what they call the Ferguson effect. If you're going to be, and we heard Biden say, by the way, that he's in favor of letting criminals sue the police. You know, it used to be.
That's outrageous. That's just outrageous.
They're not going to want to do their job if they can then lose their house.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Because somebody said you treated me wrong, you slapped me around or something, whether it's true or not.
You know, I know that George Floyd, that shouldn't have happened. But also, when it comes to certain holds, when it's an emergency situation, I don't want to handcuff them, no pun intended, Ford.
No, you're absolutely right. And what we should be concerned about, contrary to what many in the mainstream media and the Democrats are saying, is when it comes to these types of situations, what you should be worrying about is due process. And what George Floyd taught us is maybe we need better policing. We should be focused on equality under the law. But this does not solve anything. It doesn't put more money in your pocket. It doesn't put more jobs on Main Street. And it certainly does not make your family safer. This is an abomination.
Yeah, I'm going to leave this segment with Jeanette. I'm going to rate the room. I love the kitchen. I'm sorry. The guys here.
Do I get a 10?
Ford looks like he's been put outside. He can't get in the door. And Curtis looks like he's got a lot of reading in that file there he's got to catch up on. But yours looks colorful and everything in its place. I'm sure if they rate your room, it's going to look great. Just wanted to end it on a light note as we talk about some serious topics. We're following.
No couch today.
No couch. But, you know, this goes right along with it. So it looks great. Folks, we are following the president's going on down in Florida. I'm sorry, down in North Carolina, expected to speak in Morrisville. So we'll keep following that and bring that to you when it happens. He was supposed to have around 3:15, 3:30, but when he gets talking with some of the local folks, I think he enjoys that, and they do too. So it may be a little while before we see him appear. And we'll be back with more of American Agenda after this. Back with our family of co-hosts as the president continues talking. We only have a couple minutes, but Curtis, I always get excited seeing the ingenuity and the innovation associated with something like developing this new vaccine. I love hearing about that.
Yeah, that's terrific. This is the key of the American economy: innovation, our science, our research. And it's a tremendous thing. It'll be interesting to watch all of the people who've been calling for President Trump and the government to do something about this pandemic. Once this vaccine is developed, you're going to see a lot of the people on the Democratic side of the aisle suddenly become anti-vaxxers.
Oh, well, the anti-vax movement has its own following, but I think, Ford, there are going to be a lot of people that do want to get this vaccine.
I hope so. I do think that a lot of people want to get this vaccine because essentially they've been scared out of their mind. I think what I really liked today was how succinct and informative the president was in updating the nation on where we are in the battle against COVID, but also reminding, particularly the Democrats, the exhaustive step his administration has taken, particularly in Operation Warp Speed. I don't think enough gets out there about what the Trump administration has done right, only what it does wrong.
And Jeanette, go ahead with your comments. I'm trying to listen in to the president. He continues to take questions. Let's